Hey, everyone. Welcome to another live of It's Not Magic, It's Marketing, which can feel like magic. Sometimes we want it to act like magic, but most often it's not. It's just marketing. So many play on that name. Very excited. Thank you for joining us. I did run a poll on LinkedIn. If you guys are watching there or really anywhere and want to contribute, I'm very curious to see if this time, which is 7 p.m. Eastern, works best for live attendees. Look, a big goal of mine in doing this is to be able to answer your questions and be able to do so live and have a robust discussion. So if there's a time that works better, please share your thoughts. Right now, it looks like it's split pretty evenly between 11 a.m. and 7 p.m. Again, Eastern time zone. Not a lot of interest in 3 p.m., which again, you never know till you ask, which is why I'm such a big fan of qualitative research, as you may know. So yeah, if you have a preference for when you like this live, I know some folks said, well, you've got to put kids to bed and this is dinner time and whatnot. And others have said this was a good time. So anyway, so we will see and majority will win. So whichever time you guys vote on is when we will do future lives, as long as it's not 8 a.m. or before 9 a.m. I will do it. I am not a morning person, as some of you may know. My team definitely knows, because one of the first instructions people get when they join the company is I tell them, I will Slack at odd hours. Please turn off your notifications, like manage your Slack, because I do work late into the night. I am a late night owl. I always think it's funny when people ask about morning routines and it's like, what's your morning routine? It's waking up. Waking up is my morning routine. That's all to it. Ask me about my late night routine, and that's much more robust and frankly much more interesting. But somehow most people don't seem to be very interested in late night routines. They just care about how you start your day. So anyway, so I would love to hear if you guys have thoughts at what time you would prefer to do this live. Welcome to everyone who's joining us across platforms, across different countries. I'm always amazed when I look at our analytics as to what a global audience we really attract. And I thank you so much for that. So as usual, we pick a topic. I dive in. I sometimes challenge status quo. Okay. I often challenge status quo. And I give you my take on whatever it is that I feel needs to be taken on in marketing. And together, we really challenge assumptions. We look at what's working. And look, at the end of the day, the goal for marketers is to move the needle forward, right? And to be able to really question things and not be dogmatic. So I think that's such a mindset issue, and perhaps a good way to start this off, because sometimes what we think is our understanding of something, of how something should work or how people engage or whatever it is. The thing is, it's a moving target. So it's not really like there's no one and done, which is probably my favorite thing about marketing, is that there's always something new to learn. I mean, just when you feel like you've mastered something's changed, and one variable changes everything. So it really is one of my most favorite things about this field, but I can also see why that can be such a frustrating thing, because when you're juggling a ton of things, it's just one more thing that you now have to keep up with. So one of my goals with this is to be able to humbly be of service and to share some of that, make sure that you don't get left behind, that you understand what is changing in marketing, and how to play this game right, and hopefully have a little fun with it, because I think that's important too. So today's topic is PR. That's right. We're talking about press releases, everybody. I kid, I jest. So, but we are talking about public relations, PR. And PR is one of those fascinating things that I feel like in many ways has changed as time has gone. and in many ways hasn't changed and needs to change. So we'll look at it from every facet, every angle today. A lot of what I'm sharing is specifically for B2B marketers. And I'll say this because I feel like B2B is where there's a lot of opportunity. I think B2C does a much better job at marketing because they value marketing differently. I'll get more into that in a bit too. But broad agenda, we're talking about PR because across the board, when I talk to CMOs, VPs of marketing, and by the way, these are smart people, some of my favorite people, very intelligent, high level. They've got teams that they're responsible for. They've got revenue they're responsible for. I mean, these folks are by no means noobs. These are very capable, very smart, very driven individuals who are constantly trying to do what's best for the company. And sometimes not all the forces are in their favor. I mean, there's times where they're dealing with internal leadership issues amongst all their other challenges. So one of the things that comes up as I talk to these folks that I love so much is a lack of understanding around PR and how to measure it. What does it even mean? So many of them sheepishly admit to me that, I don't really know if we even do it right. I think we kind of do PR well, but I'm not really sure. And they always say this as if they're the only ones, like it's a secret. And I'm always quick to tell them that they're not. The majority of the CMOs, VPs of marketing, folks that make marketing decisions that I talk to, PR is not, if you ask them where they would peg their expertise, it's probably the lowest. Usually marketers and at that level, at the CMO VP level, you see come from a lot of performance marketing, or they come from data, analytics, attribution, or they have really deep industry expertise and they understand the persona, which is worth so much. So PR is not something that they've done a lot of. They might even manage somebody on their team that does it, but it's not something that they have a lot of experience with. So these questions are really normal. So when you talk about PR, you often hear things like PR stands for press releases, right? And for so many B2B companies, the really sad truth is it does. They look at press releases and say, that's PR. Now, press releases worked once upon a time. Since 1998, I don't think they've been effective in the way that they're used. Now, listen, I'm not against a good press release if it's done for strategic reasons, if there is a specific announcement, if we really want certain link backs, if it's industry news, whatever, there's a place and time for press releases. The problem is when press release submission is the strategy, right? So we got news, let's submit a press release. Now let's look at the history of press releases for a second. Before the internet, and partially after the internet, the way journalists would understand or look at what's happening or try to get information was through press releases. So they would go through press release databases to find newsworthy topics. And this made sense for a pre-Web 2.0, forget Web 3.0, pre-Web 2.0 era. Now, fast forward, and I can't tell you a single reporter, and please, if you are a reporter that loves press releases, send me a message because I would like to meet you. None of the reporters I've met ever look at databases to say, let me just find a great press release I can write about. It usually is not the way it works. Yet, most B2B companies, their version of PR is press releases, right? Media likes press releases? No one that I've met really enjoys press releases. And let's face it, it's not even like press releases take into consideration what the media cares about. They are solely most of them are fluff pieces. This is our announcement. This is what we're excited about. No connection to what it means for the reader. And we all know that's sort of the first rule of copywriting, what's in it for the reader. And so PR isn't that much difference. The other thing that I hear is, oh yeah, we do PR, analysts love us. Now, I have some good analyst buddies. They are smart, wonderful people that are great at their job. Is there a place for analysts and analyst relations in the broader world of PR? Yes. Is it very overrated? Also, yes. Look, the way your customers make decisions today, they're not looking at analysts as their only source. I don't even want to say they're looking at it as their primary source. It may be a source that plays into it, but really they trust their peers so much more. They trust what they read. They trust their own senses. They trust their, and I've talked a lot about, dark social, and I can dig into that a little bit more, but that's really what comes to play here, is that PR in its little box like of analyst relations or only media misses the bigger picture, that what you want smart PR to do, good media relations, takes all your stakeholders into consideration, and not just analysts, because let's face it, you might have someone in your industry who is an influencer on Twitter or through their LinkedIn or through their peer group, and they're a lot more powerful. Their recommendation may weigh a lot more heavily than an analyst, and you don't really know that until you're digging into a company, you're looking at the industry, and you're doing this research. Now, traditional PR doesn't even look at modern day influencers. In fact, B2B influencer marketing is a very, very niche practice. Now, I know this because we do it, and I literally know of one other company that does it and does it well. Just because, again, the way influencers are viewed in B2B compared to B2C has been rather myopic. It's, oh, these analysts or these trade shows, and that era is long gone. But most PR still functions that way, so I understand the confusion. The other thing you often hear with PR is, well, I don't understand why New York Times won't write about us, or why the Wall Street Journal just won't cover us. And usually from companies who've never done PR before, who've never built those relationships. Now, look, I want to be straightforward here and honest with you and tell you that it's not usually sophisticated marketers that ask this. It's oftentimes the leadership, whether it's the parallels or CEOs who say, hey, wait a second, like our story is amazing, right? Whatever news that the company has, they feel like it's worthy of prime time. But that's not always the case. And in many ways, I would argue you don't want it to be prime time news. Now, there's certain times where the universe collides and forces intervene, and what you do is all of a sudden worthy of primetime headlines. Now, this is a sweet spot. I made the joke of, someone selling toilet paper to hospitals. Yeah, most publications aren't covering that as mainstream news. But do you remember during the pandemic when there was a huge toilet paper crisis? Well, that could have been a very interesting story to tie in. So PR is really a 50-50 deal. 50% of it can be very strategic and planned, and you've got a really good message, a cadence, an understanding of your audience and what they read, where they hang out, what are they influenced by. And then the other 50% is responsive. It's looking at what is happening in the world and responding to that. So the other day I made I thought a creative TikTok, Instagram video. You guys can check it out. It's probably still there. And it was this individual who pitches a reporter. Both roles, by the way, were played by yours truly, and goes to the reporter and says, we've got this great application that looks at public sentiment and analyzes public sentiment. I mean, our data is through the roof. It's just amazing. You should see the cutting edge machine learning, AI, whatnot. And the reporter, of course, says, yeah, I've got too many deadlines. Thanks, but no thanks. I'm not covering this right now. Common mistake, by the way. So much of B2B, even the press releases I see, things that cross my desk as a contributor at times, oh my goodness, so much product, features, jargon. And at the end of the day, ain't nobody care about that. People care about what they care about, their audience cares about. So now this very savvy marketer, again, played by yours truly, approaches the reporter again, and this time says, hey, you know that Johnny Depp and Amber Heard trial? What if I could tell you what the public thinks about each side scientifically, like quantifiably tell you what each side thinks or what the public thinks about each side? Now, all of a sudden, the reporter says, sounds great, sounds very relevant. Tell me more. So this is what I mean by part of it is understanding your, a big part of it is understanding your audience, but really connecting those dots, using what's relevant, using what's happening in the greater ethos. So much of the talk today is about inflation and potentially a recessionary time, which, by the way, I am kind of rooting for. And the reason I'll tell you why is because whenever things become quote unquote challenging, so much of the market opens up for challenger brands. It's amazing. We saw it during the pandemic. We actually had certain clients that had hockey stick-like success during the pandemic because their much bigger competitors were just taking a pause. They were like, we're not going to do anything. Everybody hold. And these guys saw the opening, went for it, and they just had crazy double-digit returns on so many of their campaigns. So I'm always kind of excited when I think the market will do something different because it does open up immense number of opportunities. But right now, for example, if you have any sort of app, company, brand, if what you do in any way saves companies money or helps them save on labor, that is what you should be leading with. Now, you might say, oh, but our product is wonderful and it does so many things. It's literally the Swiss knife of whatever feature, RevOps, or whatever it is that you're aiming for. It doesn't matter. You've got to go with the angle that the media is interested in, and you have to work every single angle that you have at your disposal. So as you can see, there's a lot of confusion when it comes to PR, especially within the B2B circles. But again, my goal is to help educate, help explain, and you know what? Some of this may have been true a few years ago, 2015, 2010, 1999. But today, 2022, what I'm sharing with you is the cold, hard truth, and this is how PR works. Now, you see, I focus a lot on B2B marketers because it's what I know, it's who we work with day in and day out. But I also think it's because PR is a lot more respected by B2C companies. So why is this? Because look, a company like L'Oreal, for example, knows that if their lipstick gets featured by Allure magazine and they call it their top beauty buys, they will then spend, right, hundreds and thousands of dollars on TikTok influencers who will rush in and talk about this great lipstick and check out what Allure said. And guess what? They will get millions in sales. When I was working with Mary Kay a few years ago, I was astounded to hear that if they got their consultants, which by the way, Mary Kay has some amazing products. If they got all their consultants to just sell one more lipstick, it would add $1 billion to their bottom line. So look, B2C is very, very smart. They get it. Do you ever wonder why these companies throw like after parties for Met Gala, right? Hundreds of celebs will show up. These companies pay money to have their product put in gift bags, just get in front of these celebs, because they know it'll drive sales. They know it'll create desire. It'll create demand for that, right? And then their product will fulfill said demand. They understand that exposure means sales. The problem is they don't go nuts trying to attribute every single lipstick sale because, I mean, who does that? Oh, wait, B2B does that. That's who does that. Because in B2C, you don't really see that. People aren't obsessed with trying to figure out, so you bought that lipstick, huh? Really though, what was that last attribution? Was it that TikTok influencer? Was it when your sister said that she really liked it? Or was it when you saw that celeb wear that color? No, they're not obsessed with it like B2B marketers are. And I will tell you this, I do not think it is the fault of B2B marketers. I genuinely don't believe that this is because B2B marketers aren't smart or creative or any of that. It's that incentives in B2B are horribly misaligned. So look, this is a big mindset issue, right? B2B marketers don't get a pat on the back for creative campaigns. They don't get, hey, that was an awesome, you created some great content there. Our brand is so likable. They can't even use the B word because, ew, how do you even measure that? By B word, of course, I mean brand. The emphasis is on leads, leads, and leads. And rarely does anybody stop to say, what's the cost of acquisition? Or are these leads even qualified to buy? Or the fact that their sales cycle takes almost a year? It's the numbers. And that's what B2B marketers get rewarded by. In fact, if they ever decide to go color a little out of the lines, boy, they really have to, again, connect it back to the numbers. And so in a way, it's very challenging because they've got leadership on one side, and the historic mindset of leadership has been leads, leads, leads. More people we get in front of. Not thinking about how quickly do they move through the pipeline? Are these leads that want to work with us? And frankly, look, I don't think anybody in sales ever says, boy, I wish I had to work harder for that close. Nobody, absolutely nobody says I want to work harder for that close. So on one side, they've got leadership that is very leads, numbers obsessed. The other side, they've got a whole industry of attribution software and folks, vendors who are just all too happy to say, you know what? Let me help you make your boss happier and give you those shiny numbers. That's it. And so because these folks are catering to the mindset, marketers are stuck squarely in the middle to say, yeah, okay, all right, look, boss, if you give me $1, I will give you $2. See, advertising, it works. I got you a lead. No one stops to say, what happens if we spend $10 on something else? Would that give us 100 back? Like, it's a very interesting model because most attribution software, actually, I haven't seen a single one that can, even though I've heard claims, they don't measure the way people are even buying today. And so much, I've talked a little bit about this. I've talked a lot about this in prior videos, but I'll touch base on it again. There's some things happening in the social world. There's social and media, and they're splitting. There is media where we consume information, often from strangers, and social where we actually engage with our closest folks, whether they're our teammates, our colleagues, our peers, our family. And so a lot of what we see in media gets shared on social, but most of what gets shared on social is dark, meaning companies can't trace that. In fact, I kid you not, right before this, I had a call with a prospect, really cool B2B tech company in healthcare. And I spit out my tea, which by the way, I almost spit out my tea when I asked him how he heard about us. And he legit said dark social. And after, of course, standing up and giving him a standing ovation, I asked him what that meant specifically. And he said, oh, I'm part of a Slack group of marketers, and something that you had shared or created was shared within the group. That's what he shared with me. This happens every single day. You cannot measure this, okay? You cannot connect the dots. Actually, let me say that in a different way. You cannot connect those dots. You can't say, there you are. I will just follow. No. This is not how it works. But there is a way to measure it. And it is astonishingly simple. We'll talk a little bit more about measurement, but it's simply to ask your clients. The other day, I was talking to another B2B company, this time in manufacturing, and the head of marketing told me, well, how are we gonna measure, like, all these folks that, you're telling us to ask, where did you find us? How do we track this? And I looked her dead set in the eye and I said, oh my God, how many leads do you get a year? Like 1,000? Hundreds of thousands? And she goes, oh no. She goes, no. We're our lead, our item is a very high ticket item. If we're doing amazing, we might get 10 leads a month. And I said, is there anyone that could look at those 10 leads a month, just looking at the actual form feed and tell you this? And she started laughing because she knew exactly what I was getting at. Of course, the beauty for B2B companies, for most of them, is you're not dealing with the Coca-Colas or the Cheetos. You don't have that much data. An intern can sit there and look at the field and say, where did you hear about us? Oh, LinkedIn. Oh, Slack channel. Oh, Facebook group. Because if you look at attribution software, you just rely on analytics. I will tell you what it'll tell you. Direct traffic, search. Direct traffic, search. And it makes sense, right? Because let's say someone reads an article about your company on Forbes, and in the form, it says, and I have seen our client forms, so I know this. In the client forms, it says, where did you hear about us? And it says an article about your company on Forbes that a colleague sent to me on WhatsApp. True story. You look at Google and you look at how did they find us, and it says Google search. Because what happens is Google used to be a search engine in the true sense of search. People used to start their search there. Today, so much of what we see, it's a gateway. We go in and we type in the company we're looking for and we go straight and we find it. So a lot has shifted in that way, all right? And so again, if you look at analytics, your strategy is going to be so badly skewed versus if you just ask your customers. And for most companies, the volume is not that much. I mean, unless you're getting hundreds and thousands of leads, which I would love to talk to you, because qualified leads, there's no way you can't look at the data. And so you've got to start asking your customers. And it's really not groundbreaking advice, but it is true measurement. And it doesn't always have to look like numbers on a graph. Okay, so back to kind of like, what is PR? Look, for the longest time, PR has been seen as marketing adjacent, all right? Like something on the side. There's marketing and then there's like PR, the little stepchild of marketing. But if used correctly, and by the way, I do believe that PR's rightful place is under a CMO. Maybe one day I'll change my mind, but right now it's the hill I'm willing to die on because the CMO's responsibilities continue to grow. That's not to say you can't have a PR manager or there can't be someone at comms that's overseeing that relationship, but PR is just such an important tool in your arsenal that you don't want it to be adjacent. You want it to be in your umbrella. And look, again, there's just so much confusion about PR. I want to share HubSpot's take with you. Again, I will take a sip of my tea because I don't want to spit it out when I read this to you. Great tea, by the way. Maybe we should get a tea sponsor for this. Hey, let me know. My team is loving this, by the way. They hate it when I go off cuff. All right. So here's their take. Public relations and marketing are similar in their actions and tactics, but their goals are quite different. The main goal of PR is to boost the reputation of your brand. On the other hand, the main goal of marketing is to drive sales. What? The main goal of PR is to boost the reputation of your brand, while the main goal of marketing is to drive sales. All right, let's dissect this for a minute. No, the goal of sales is to drive sales. This is another problem. You see how things are like an onion and you take one layer and you find another and you just keep unlayering the layers? That's what we do here. And that's why the show is called It's not magic, it's marketing, because it's some onion analogy. All right. So the goal of sales is to drive sales. Most marketers today do sales. It used to be that you needed marketing to get you leads, to get you contact info. You don't need that. Sales can do that. Very easy to pull up emails and LinkedIn profiles and numbers. Like, call that a lead if you want. It's not, but sure, like anybody can do that. That's not marketing's role. The goal of marketing is to create affinity. It's to generate demand. And dare I say it, boost the reputation of your brand so prospects want to do business with you. All right. As the great Peter Drucker once said, the aim of marketing is to make sales superfluous. And again, sometimes people say like, oh, what about sales? I'm like, no one in sales, to my knowledge, to this day, has ever said, boy, I wish I had to work harder for that close. Nobody. You know what I do hear from salespeople? Boy, I wish our marketing was a little bit stronger so sales could be easier. Great idea. Marketing should then be allowed to market. The problem is most of the marketing activities that actually move the needle and make sales easier so sales can close and do what sales needs to do are not easily attributable. They're not tracked by software. They don't conform to the mindset that historically traditional B2B companies have. So if you're thinking to yourself like, boy, marketing and PR sound awful alike, you aren't wrong. They very much are. So here's sort of a better definition. Also, thank you, HubSpot. Public relations is the practice of leveraging media channels, note, media channels across the board, to promote your organization and cultivate a positive public perception. PR is also the process of managing your organization's brand and communications, and it can often be divided into earned, owned, and paid. Thank you. Yay. All right. So again, if that sounds pretty comprehensive, it's because it is comprehensive. PR is meant to be comprehensive. But again, we'll talk about what's wrong with traditional PR, so many things. But hopefully this at least gets us on the same page. So that's PR. So let's look at the different sections. You've got owned. Owned is amazing. This is your website. It's your white papers. It's your webinars. Yes, content marketing. This is owned content. All the clients that we work with at Zen Media, we tell them you need to beef up your owned media. Your owned content is very, very important because if you just focus on earned, you will eventually be disappointed. You've got to have all these three pieces playing together. The challenge is owned takes the longest time to give you returns. It's organic. It takes more work. It takes more consistency. It takes time to build your owned media platform. So sometimes clients say, I want to start a podcast. Fantastic. How many podcasts have you been on? None. Okay. Start there. If the goal is to get quick wins, earned media is your best friend. It's actually, again, I'll get into this a little bit more, but earned media is the quickest way to drive quick wins. And it is free in the sense that you're not paying reporters to write about you. Now, you might work with an agency, you're paying, of course, your talent, labor, whatever, but that's just the cost of doing business in general. So earned media is media relations. It's speaking, it's being a guest on podcasts, it's LinkedIn fireside chats, it's any way that you can engage with your audience. Your audience includes media, it includes influencers, and includes peers, it's broad. Paid media is exactly what it sounds like. Social media advertising, influencer marketing, and pay-per-click. And look, sometimes these things overlap. For example, a conference that you really want to be at where your prospects are may decide they have speaking opportunities, but they're paid speaking opportunities. Now, sometimes this is totally fine for you to, if your audience is there and it's a good ROI, it makes sense to do it. Now, some may say, but this is paid. Yes, it is paid. There's also times where it works to amplify earned media. Let's say you have a killer write-up in Inc. and it's about how your company is doing cool things. You don't want it to just stay on Inc. You want to shout that from the rooftops. You want all your prospects to have read it. This is where it may make sense to put some advertising dollars behind it and amplify that. So you see how this doesn't sound like traditional PR? Traditional PR is very myopic. And it's a lot of times why people think traditional PR sucks, because it does. Most B2B companies fall under two buckets, right? And it might be true even if you're not B2B, but again, for the sake of this lens and this episode, I'm really focusing in on that. It's also who we work with day in and day out. So I feel like I have a lot more practical in the trenches knowledge for you there. So one, they've never done PR because they think PR means press releases, and press releases do suck. So ergo, PR sucks. I would agree. Two, they've done PR but found it doesn't work because A, the firm they chose wasn't a right fit. I could talk more about that. Or B, expectations were to have PR behave like advertising, and it intrinsically doesn't work that way. Rarely does someone listen to a podcast, go running and go, oh my God, I got to buy this thing, especially for big ticket items, especially for B2B. No, right? It's just not the way. And frankly, advertising doesn't behave like that, because when was the last time someone saw a billboard and was like, boy, that's the software we need? Doesn't work that way either. It is important to find the right fit for your company. Sometimes it makes sense to have an in-house person. Often those in-house people also need agencies because there is something to be said about relationships. One common complaint I hear about bigger firms like Edelman or Weber Shandwick, some of the big guys, is that unless you are a really big company like Procter and Gamble, you get assigned a C team. So it's one of the things that I've been very careful about. And at Zen Media, I'm really excited that all our clients have a senior level team. I just don't feel like it's fair to do the type of PR you have to do today, where it can just be handed to someone who's perhaps getting their start, or there's nothing wrong with that, by the way. I just think PR needs a very team approach and not a singular person approach, especially with the way it is today. So there's certain expectations there, but most PR firms, the challenge is that they also see themselves as marketing adjacent. I mean, PR firms have their own associations, their own lingo. It's really funny to see like how many different takes there are in PR, but they'll often be like, oh no, we're on the comms side of things, not realizing that, well, comms has to serve a purpose. So if you ask most traditional PR firms about sales enablement, they'll balk. Like conversion optimization, nope. How does PR work beyond just top of funnel? What funnel? There's nothing wrong with that. I do sometimes see, with PR firms have their roots in communication, which is awesome. But a lot of them add digital marketing like an afterthought to stay relevant. Like, oh, cool, like social media, we need to do that. Why don't we put this person, usually someone under the age of 25, like they'll be our new social media strategist, and we'll now offer social media. It doesn't work that way though, because understanding social and dark, it's a very different world. And I know this because with Zen Media, we started as a marketing firm. We still are a marketing firm. And so people would say like, oh, but you guys do PR. I'm like, yeah, because PR should be a huge part of your strategy. It is by far the quickest way to earn some good wins while your other channels ramp up. So in my book, there's almost nothing as strong as PR. Now you may say, oh, advertising, you can turn that on. Sure. But tell me, do you believe what people and businesses say about themselves, or do you believe what others say about them? I mean, this isn't like marketing, advanced lessons. This is like human nature 101. So anyway, so look, I think traditional media is really, I should say traditional media relations or PR is really failing companies because it functions like it's 1994, right? But today you have multiple stakeholders. You've got investors, you've got peer influencers. So what the world really needs is more like the sales-enabled PR that understands how marketing works and can like craft the strategy that works at every level of the funnel. So sure, you get a placement, but really it's not the placement itself. It's what do you do with that placement? How is it being shared in dark social channels? It's how are you integrating that into your overall strategy? How are you getting in front of more of the right people? Are your salespeople even using it in their nurture sequences? And most of the time is no, sales doesn't know. Like, again, PR is marketing adjacent, right? So unless they stumble on it by themselves, they don't know. And they certainly don't know how to use that because it's not part of sales training. Nobody teaches sales folks, here's how to use PR in your sales training. Okay, maybe that's an idea. So maybe I'll do a whole podcast on how to use PR within the sales cycle. Steph, please take note and remind me later. And I think that might, so if you guys want to see that, let me know and I can do that. So kind of brings us to, right, like, how do we measure this? And I will, again, I think I keep finding that there's a lot of hills I would die on. So maybe I just pick one, but there's a lot of things I very strongly believe. Qualitatively, asking your customers, where did you hear about us? I actually joked with Marcus Sheridan, a buddy of mine who wrote one of the best-selling books, and it's called They Ask, You Answer. And I was like, we should write the flip version of that, which is like, you ask, they answer. Marcus, if you're listening, I still think that's a great idea. But it's so important. Just ask your customers, how do they hear about you? Ask your leads, ask your prospects. Again, B2B has such an advantage because you do have more qualified leads. You've got a very specific ICP, so you can ask them this. Please don't make it a drop down because they're just going to default to whatever comes first. You know, like, your prospects don't actually care about your marketing effectiveness. They just care whether you can help them. So just keep it a blank field, make it required. You will be surprised what they ask, what they answer. And it'll also help guide you, because if you're really sophisticated and someone says, I was referred by a current client, you know that they already understand you. They're probably been pre-sold if that client's had a good experience with your services. And so you don't want to throw, you know, a SDR or a BDR at them. You want to make sure that it's treated differently than the lead that does land and says, you know, plain old Google search. So just important to also think about how you look at your prospects and not treat everybody equally. So qualitatively is super important. Now, quantitatively, look, you can measure a ton of things. Create your own dashboard if you want. Share a voice. Talked a ton about this in earlier videos, which, by the way, if you want to go listen to the podcast, it's on Spotify, it's on Apple. You can find earlier videos here on LinkedIn and on YouTube. So you can find all the stuff. So quantitatively, share voice, advertising value equivalency, the number of branded search queries over time. Do people searching for you by name go up? Does that number go up? Acquisition costs. If you're doing PR well and right, your acquisition costs should be going down because you have more credibility and you have to work harder to go grab strangers by the collar and bring them over and be like, here's your lead. Traffic, of course, social shares, engagement, the length of your sales cycle should be reducing. It should get faster because people are pre-sold. I have a whole keynote I deliver called Close Before You Convince, because so many of the people, like over 60% of folks that come through, and I think this was by Forrester, so I do think analysts are great for their research, have already like their majority through the buying cycle before they even speak to your salespeople. They don't want to talk to your salespeople until they feel like they already have the answer. They just need some minor things, right, for you to fill in those blanks. Pipeline velocity. How quickly does someone move through that pipeline, right? How quickly do they come in, they move from prospect, they're interested, to closing a deal? And then domain authority, of course, like how much is your brand value going up? So look, there's a lot of things you can measure if you want to put shiny numbers, but nothing will beat just asking your clients how they're finding out about you. Okay, so I also wanted to address, why am I sharing this today? Because there's so many topics I could have covered. God knows you guys have asked me a million topics to cover. Hopefully we will be able to cover all of them in the coming weeks. But I wanted to cover this today because it's just what I'm hearing, you know, really smart marketers kind of perplexed by PR. And again, not their fault. I think PR is perplexed by PR. So I wanted to clarify these things. And then I also wanted to kind of address the times. Look, uncertain times lead to more discerning buyers, right? more discerning buyers need more third-party credibility. There's nothing more powerful than PR when it comes to that third-party credibility. If you're finding that sales cycles are taking longer, you're being ghosted more often than before, leads are just moving a lot more slowly, all of this is completely normal. Like, look what's happened. Inflation hits, a recession is looking probable. And I know we have a global audience. I think this is affecting folks globally. It's not just the US right now. And when this happens, everyone does like the deer in headlights move, right? Like crypto is crashing, what is going on? And your job as a marketer is to create safety, it's to provide guidance and hope. You've got to help Sherpa your prospects and customers. What does this more than anything else? It starts with a T, it's trust. Trust. If they trust you, they will do business with you, they will feel safer in doing business with you. And at the end of the day, so much of PR is about building that trust, all right? So that's why I'm covering this today. I hope you found it informative. Steph, let's open it up for questions because I am sure that we have some.
Yes, the first question is from Ben, who he loves your cup and says, yes, it's quite enormous, but he would love to hear how B2B can leverage the dark social.
Ben, thank you so much. A fellow tea lover, I'll show you, it literally says my cup of tea. So Ben, I want to answer this. I love your question. It's less about leveraging or using dark social and more about understanding dark social. And here's what I mean by that. You can't control it, right? Like you can't control what someone is sharing in their Slack channels, what someone is sharing on WhatsApp, what they like you can't control that. What you can do is have an understanding that as you invest in owned and earned, that there is a lot more happening behind the scenes than meets the eye. And how you know it's working is by simply asking your customers. And so you can't necessarily control that process. And here's why this is so important, because people will sometimes say social media isn't working, or they will say, hey, you know what? Man, we're creating all this content and I don't think that it's working. And I'm like, oh, what are you creating content about? It's fiber optics underground. We create a lot of content around fiber optics. And I'm thinking, are prospects supposed to leave a comment on your blog post? Like, again, it's 2002, like, man, great article on fiber optics, Bob. Like, this is exactly what we were looking for. No. They're sharing that. They're talking about that. They're being educated. The majority of folks online, your prospects, are consumers. They're never going to comment. They're not publicly there waving their hands, jumping up and down to say, look at me, I am consuming your content. So if you use the basis of strictly comments, engagement, what you see is what you believe, you are going to be sorely disappointed because you are going to think it's not working. But that's not the case. Imagine that I spoke to that wonderful gentleman earlier today. One, I asked him, we ask on our forums, how did you hear about us? And he said dark social. When we got on the line, I said, I'm so curious, please explain dark social. And so he shared with me a Slack channel. Here's what we talk about. I find this fascinating because otherwise I'm just thinking, man, this podcast is a waste of time. All our content's a waste of time. No, because even as I'm doing this and I'm recording this, Ben, for all the folks that are watching live, this goes out. I mean, we have a reach of over 1 million. How many people do you think are commenting and leaving? A fraction. But do you know how many individuals I talk to privately that are like, oh yeah, I listened to the podcast or I watched your video or whatever? I would not know that unless they volunteered it, unless I asked for it. So I just think it's very, very important to not discount your efforts by thinking it's not working because you're not measuring the way that would actually give you the answer that you're looking for. So great question.
Awesome. Thanks, Shama. I think you pretty much already addressed this, but just want to make sure that we don't leave Gideon out. Gideon wants to know if there are any tools to tracking for content that gets shared on dark social.
Gideon, I love that question. Yes, the tool is you. I say this lovingly as in like, meaning ask, right? Like the tool is people, it's individuals. Ask your customers how they engage with you, where they find you. Like they will tell you. People, this isn't a secret, man. Like they're not trying to be like, well, I will never really reveal my sources. Maybe if someone says that, that should be like a red flag. But generally, people are more than happy to tell you how they found you. The thing is, most people, businesses don't ask. They somehow feel like this needs to be so secretive. Like we know our ICPs, but we can't let them know. Like we think we understand that, but like, why would we ask them? Just, it's marketing is not something that needs to happen in secret. It's, again, marketing is not, it's not magic. It is marketing. So you can ask. Like nobody judges you for saying, how did you not just already know that though? Like most of the times that I ask someone this, they usually respond with, oh, cool. Yeah. Like, thanks. They're glad that you were curious, that you want to know more. I mean, they're not looking at it like, oh, I guess you just want to know for your marketing purposes, right? So again, you can use fancy tools that will try to get, or you could just do the most simple thing in the world, which is ask your customers. I really need to get Marcus to write that book with me. I would write it, but I feel bad because I feel like he wrote the OG. So I just want to write the flip side of that book. Yeah, look, qualitative research is so important. In academia, there's actually two types of researchers. There are qualitative researchers and quantitative, not that they don't use the other for bolstering their work. But if you look at Brene Brown, so much of her research is qualitative. And think about how much, the world at large has gotten in these past years from her work. And it's qualitative. It's asking people, like, how do you measure vulnerability and these things that she talks about on a grand scale without asking, without engaging, without storytelling? So I think that's the tool. The tool is you. The tool is your people. Ask. I would be amazed. You will be amazed. And then you will know what's working and what's not working. It's really that simple.
Great. Thanks, Shama. So I have a question from Nina. Should we have an agency that does just PR, or should we try to find an agency that is a PR and marketing firm?
Great question. So if you want to do PR, you want an agency that gets it. So there's a couple of things. One, you want to make sure that, look, a lot of it is the people. Do you feel like these people get PR? And, some of the things I talked about, if they're only looking at placements, okay, what do you do after a placement? So it's not so much what a firm labels themselves, whether they call themselves marketing or PR only. It's more, do they understand how PR has evolved and how it fits in? And it also depends on your needs. If you are a company that's on the verge of IPO and you just really need the comms side, where you're like, we just need someone to manage communications, and yes, a purely PR firm can do that. If you're running a brand or a business and you're building something and you're like, hey, we need this for demand gen, we need leads, we're trying to grow awareness, and then you want a PR firm that understands marketing and understands what you're trying to achieve and how PR fits into the things. So I hope that's helpful. But great question.
Awesome. I think we have time for one more. Derek said they just started engaging with a PR agency, and their CEO thinks that they should be in the Wall Street Journal and other tier one outlets right away. How long does it really take?
Well, should you, Derek? I don't look, I think the idea that it should take long or not long is a bit of a misnomer. If you have something really exciting, you could get in the Wall Street Journal in the first week. I don't think there's like oh, we want big tier press. And no, I think it's all about angles, timing, positioning, and timing does play a big role. Let's say that you are an ammunitions manufacturer. I'm completely making this up, Derek. I don't know if you are, but let's say you manufacture ammunitions. Well, guess what? A war just broke out. Yeah, all of a sudden, I think what you do became a lot more relevant on a global scale, right? So, or you're a company that produces tourniquets. Guess what? There is a great lack of tourniquets right now. Or you're a company that does supply chain logistics and there's a baby formula shortage. You don't have to sell baby formula, but if you can talk about supply chain, if you can talk about logistics, there's your ticket right there. So I think there's a lot of factors there about how quickly can you get press. I also think it's very important to help explain to your boss and explain to your leadership, what are you trying to accomplish with this press, right? A lot of times with B2B, it's not just about the big names or the big publications, it's getting in front of your right audience. Sometimes I've heard folks say like, oh my God, our competitor got into XYZ. Well, they paid for that. And that's always an option, but they might not realize that that's a paid opportunity versus an earned. And by the way, I'm not poo-pooing it. I think there's plenty of good paid opportunities there. There's plenty of awards where you have to pay to submit and be, pay to get nominated and so forth, like the Inc. 5000. But we have multiple clients who made the Inc. 5000 and then use that as a springboard to get more press within their industry, to get their voice heard, to get in front of their prospects, to grow their share of business with their current customers. So a lot of it, again, comes back to strategy and being strategic about how you use PR. So great question. Thank you guys so much for joining. Thank you, Ms. Stephanie Chavez, who's our president here at Zen Media and knows, by the way, a ton more than I do about marketing and PR, but graciously lets me talk her ear off and joins us here. So thanks so much, Steph, for handling everything behind the scenes. The team here is growing so rapidly, but I think Steph is one of the few folks that can keep up with my pace and deal with me. So she takes one for the team. But yeah, I hope this was useful for you guys. Would love to hear what other topics you want me to cover in the future. This is really for you. So please be on the lookout. We might change the time of when we do this to see if a different time works better for the majority of our audience. If you can't make it live, again, submit your questions in advance. You can always catch the podcast. You can catch it later. But thank you so much for joining us. Bye for now. Have a great night or day, yes, depending on where you are in the world.